This is a record taken September 2015 that the Sellers Society of Great Britain visited a number of farms in the Auberge region of France. The trip was organised by Pedigree Tours through Paul Campbell and lasted 5 days. Originally, the plan was to incorporate a visit to the annual show of the Sellers Society of France, but unfortunately, the day before our departure, we were notified the show had been cancelled due to an outbreak of blue tongue. This initially threatened to put a damper on the trip, but thanks to the efforts of Pedigree Tours and the French Sellers Society, there was some hasty rescheduling. This led to the visitors seeing 4 additional farms. As visitors, we were bussed around the various farms, taking in some beautiful scenery of the area and traditional French villages en route. Indeed, after having got a plane to Lyon, we travelled around 1,200 miles over the 5 days. Those on the trip represented a cross-section of UK farmers from as far afield as Scotland, Mid Wales, Southern England, and even one American who is now farming in Russia. Here we are at the first stop on our tour. Just trying to get a picture of the general consensus of those who are with us, and we've just had a bit of a hair-raising 1/4 mile coming up to this farm, where a bus this size certainly wasn't designed for the road we involved, but thanks to a very capable driver with inches to spare, we seem to have managed to make it. Our first farm visit was to a farm owned by Monsieur Gérard Trin, which was in Réac, north of Aurillac. As with all of our visits, there was some lovely scenery at the farm, which provided a beautiful backdrop to his fine herd of Sellers. Pierre Lasseppe, a technician with the French Sellers Society, was at this first farm to meet us and also act as our translator, which was obviously very necessary. Monsieur Trin began by telling us a little about his farming operation. Monsieur Trin has 3 farms, but he doesn't actually show his animals. In terms of raising the stock, he told us he feeds grass and hay both summer and winter, but doesn't use any concentrates at all. His animals are sold for breeding, and he calves from February to April. The calf weights at 9 months average out at 380 kilos for the bulls, and heifers weighing in at about 320 kilos. The heifer and bull calf groups are separated before weaning, and the weaning takes place at about 9 months of age. It is worth pointing out here that the altitude at the farm was between 600 and 850 metres, so this does lead to a sizable fluctuation in temperature. Monsieur Trin had opted for wooden farm buildings, as it is said these stick the extremes of temperature far better than metal-framed ones. It was to become something of a feature of the trip that the French hospitality was very good, and Monsieur Trin provided refreshments at the conclusion of our visit, including a taste of the local liqueur. After taking of the refreshments, it was back on the road, and after a brief stop at a bull test station, it was on to our next farm. This was owned by a Monsieur Gaec Andrea in the Saint-Bonnet de Salers, where we were to be hosted by Olivier and Chris. This couple took over the farm in 1995 with 80 cows crossing with a Charolais, which they have since built up to a herd of 160 cows. But they are going through something of a transition regarding the saleurs, in that they are gradually winding down their crossing group and increasing their pedigree herd. They calve December to March, weaning in October, and heifers go to the bull at 18 months of age. They informed us that the reasons they are moving to pedigree saleurs are, firstly, the value of saleurs heifers sold for breeding makes up for the lower value of bulls that have to go for meat. The average is higher. If they have an expensive saleurs bull, they get more calves, obviously, out of that bull. They also have more saleurs heifers to choose from as replacements. And finally, they have more chance of breeding a really good saleurs bull. On this farm, they do feed concentrates to their young stock, 1 kilo a day in the winter months. We were told that the area of Sambonnet de Saleurs is between 720 and 1350 meters high. Once again, we were given refreshments here, and in return, as always, we presented gifts to Olivier and Chris. So that rounded off day one, and it was back to the hotel to digest what we had learned on the opening day of our trip. Day two dawned, and with it the view from the hotel balcony. This was a lovely backdrop to what was very comfortable accommodation. But as well as being attractive to look at, this was also a key part of the local farming infrastructure, as rather than a river, this was actually a reservoir. In addition to this, we were told that the water in this reservoir wasn't for the use of the local town or city, but rather was for farmers to abstract water for their use whenever they needed it for irrigation. The road bridge is nearest to the camera, while we were told that the higher of the two bridges was for the railway. This was apparently, although looks inadequate for the job, designed and built by the same man who designed and built the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Our first farm on day two was owned by Monsieur Michel at Les Cures Valois. Here he farms at a height of 13 to 1400 metres and is in partnership with his brother, who is an AI technician, so they do all their crossing using AI. He told us it had been a very dry year and he only has 50% of his forage at the moment, although he does hope to get a late cut, and they have now had some rain which will hopefully make up some of the loss. He also has alfalfa silage. Monsieur Michel has 150 cows and calves around 100 of them in December, the rest in January and February. They are winter housed for 5 months. Each year he keeps 25 heifers for replacements and sells 12 heifers aged 2 to 3 years for breeding purposes. He keeps 20 cows for crossing with the Charolais, and he has bred 35 bulls which have gone into the AI system. Monsieur Michel first showed us a group of heifers which would have been at the Saleurs show. We then saw a group of mixed-aged cows. They had been on the hill with their calves all summer and weaned some 1 or 2 weeks previously. We seem to have seen very little reseeding of these pastures. The context of what is grown here seems to be of a permanent pasture tradition, containing probably varieties which are strange to us in our country, but are obviously suitable to these farms, which for the most part what we've seen are very high up, 1,000 meters plus above sea level. So obviously they know what will do well at these heights. Obviously the Salers in particular is well suited to this form of grass and grazing conditions. We also saw a field which contained 4 bulls, but none were for sale, we were told. We then went on to see the family groups which would have been taken to the show this very weekend. A very impressive show of animals, and such a delight to walk amongst them. Here we are at the farm building, the same farm as we have just seen the previous heifers on that were due to go to the show. This is just a general look round what is obviously the winter housing when the cattle eventually come inside. Just gives us an idea of the wooden frame building which seems to be so popular in France. The machinery that seems to be currently used on these livestock farms. In the background, hay, which seems to be the staple winter diet on these places. Apparently the summer has been very dry this year, and some of the farms have already told us that they've made about half as much hay as they would normally expect to. Again, our visit ended with refreshments gratefully received and our presentation of thanks and gifts. We boarded our bus then and set off to our next farm visit. Earl de la Moligny near Billet, where we were met by wife Martine and son Pierre Alain, who showed us some of their 100% pure saleurs. They have 3 farms, one at 700 metres, the second at 1,000 metres, and finally the highest one of the 3 at 1,300 metres. We were told the mountain pasture is good grass. They use both AI and private and public bulls. They are chasing productivity and conformation and prepare animals for commercial production and showing. Milk production is also very important to them. We saw a group of 18-month-old heifers, some sired by either of the 2 well-known bulls, Evaille and Galois. We visited a second block of land and saw an 18-month-old bull sweeping up with a group of approximately 20 cows with bull calves. This bull and a few of the bull calves may well be heading for the UK. Again, we thanked Martine and Pierre Alain for their generosity in providing sustenance and showing us around, and presented them with the customary gifts. As a light break, we took a 2-hour trip down the Garabit Reservoir, which was more like a river cruise as it wasn't very wide. Some sections of the water in the reservoir are heated by volcanic springs under the surface. This proved to be a calming couple of hours to relax in a picturesque setting with a glass of wine or 2 and gentle chat. It was then, after an evening meal, off to bed to prepare for day 3. Day 3, and another early start and another wonderful journey, this time to meet Christophe Duval and Valentin Bess. Christophe has 136 cows on 150 hectares. 50 of the cows are with the Charolais bull and 86 with saleurs. They select for muscle, frame and milk. The main farm stands at 950 metres. They select Charolais bulls that are bred for crossing to the saleurs. Bull calves are approximately 250 kilos at weaning and are then fed 1.7 kilograms of concentrates to sell at 10 months for approximately €1,050. Some of our visiting farmers were quite anxious to see what sort of a Charolais bull was being used. And we've got 2 over there. They send their poorest conformation second calf saleurs to the Charolais bull, as these only go for meat. They will be sending 2 bulls to the test station this year. The location of this farm was fantastic, with a beautiful old farmhouse. More hospitality and gifts were presented.
If I pan round, you might get a chance to see again some of the countryside that we're in. Unfortunately, the sun isn't shining too well for us, but it's a job to get a good picture of what where we are and what we're doing. But I don't know how many meters, but well over 13 or 1400 meters up, I guess. And perhaps, as you can tell from, it's a good grazing country, and there's been quite a bit of discussion about what sorts of grass they do grow here and how often they rejuvenate it or drill into old swards, because I wouldn't think it gets ploughed very often. But it does seem as though a lot of the swards have had various species, from red clover to ordinary clover to chicory. I mean, several other guesses of what might be added to them to keep these lays as fruitful as they are at this sort of height. We are now at a herd of a fresh owner, not far from the last one, but obviously heifers running with a sailor's bull.
We then headed for the farm of Monsieur Laurent de Fisque, near to Chalade. He had 80 Salers cows, half for breeding and half for crossing. We wandered amongst the cattle as we did at all the farms. Funnily enough, the older bull seemed to take a liking to our big blue bus.
This is the second lot of cattle that we have seen on this farm, or that the visitors have seen. Paul and I stayed behind to help the driver turn the bus round, which was a bit of an effort because of undulating ground and tight turning circles, etc. But so we haven't seen one other lot of cattle, but there's obviously quite a show here of cows with heifer calves, I think, as far as I've seen yet. Boys are moving in amongst them a bit now, and they're, not taking too much notice, shall we say.
At the farmhouse, we were shown a very nice bull, for sale at €6,350, and a very impressive shed, as we had seen at other farms, paid for by European funding, where we were provided with refreshments and gifts again were presented. They were on good grazing and looked fit. The location of these farms had to be seen to be believed, high up in the mountains with beautiful pasture. We then mustered the troops back to the coach to ascend the mountain to our final farm visit. Shalal, our coach driver, had to test every bit of his driving skills to negotiate the trek up the mountain through tiny villages, and we eventually reached the top at 1150 metres, where Giraud Delorme and his father were busy milking Salers right on the top of the mountain.
At least it's dry this morning. It's the nicest morning we've had. Now we are looking at a herd of sailor cows that are being milked. We're at a height of 1150 feet, and they're milked outdoors, as we will see in a minute, through a mobile parlour.
He had a mobile milking parlour with 5 stands, a group of cows gathered round, and a pen of calves. What we saw was amazing. Geraud and his father called in the cows by name, one at a time. They went to a free milking stand. Then Geraud or his father called the name of the cow by the pen of calves, and miraculously the cow's calf came alive and made its way through a pen full of calves to the gate, where it was let out to go to its mother to start sucking. This to let down the milk. Then the calf was removed and a cluster fitted. Once milking was complete, the calf went back to the pen and the mother went off in the field. It really was one of those events that you needed to see to believe. We headed back to the hotel in awe of what we had seen and reflected on the whole trip. We'd been concerned that without the show it would be a damp squib of a tour, but how mistaken we were. It was better than we could ever have wished. In fact, I think it should be on the agenda for every UK Salers breeder.